Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us, wherever you're joining us from. Super excited to chat today. We have a great group to discuss the topic today, Mobile DevEx, the hidden cost of releases. We're going to jump right in. There's a lot of ground we're going to cover. A quick overview, just so you know what to expect in terms of how we're going to organize the chat. We're going to start with some sort of framing, the hidden cost of releases, specifically busy work, a term that we come back to a lot. We're really trying to capture the cost of subpar DevEx or why you might even care about DevEx on your mobile team. We'll move on from there to look at the upside. If you do focus on DevEx and prioritize that, improvements there, what that can bring to your team, competitive advantage from a business standpoint as well, zooming out. And then finally, we want to leave you with some ideas, some practical, actionable ideas for how to actually improve DevEx and solve some of these pain points and realize some of that potential upside. So general areas that we're going to walk through here at the end, of course, in time for Q&A. Please also drop any questions in the chat. Happy to get to those as we discuss as well, where it makes sense. We'll also have some polls on the side here. So if you want to answer those, it's cool to see how people are thinking about the topics and a bit of your background as well. But before we get started here, I'd love to introduce the crew here, starting with myself. Really quickly, I'm one of the founders of Runway. We are a mobile release management platform. Former life, really my whole career before Runway, I was a mobile engineer. So I've lived this experience for myself. That's true of a lot of our team as well. And very excited to have the rest of the group here. So I'll let you all introduce yourselves as well.
Yeah, I'll go next. My name is Cody Arkland. I lead our developer experience team at Sentry. So Sentry is an observability platform. A lot of people use this for monitoring errors. We do traces, we do logs. We have some cool AI stuff. There's a whole bunch of things inside of Sentry. So really try to focus on how we can help people get like code fixed, get applications fixed and working better and understand the performance parts of it. And we've done a lot of work around the mobile space. And so excited to have this conversation with everyone.
I'll go next. My name is Darcey. I've been mobile since 2001. So through many different mobile platforms and trying to figure out how to deploy. Most recently, I was at Reddit doing that. And then as of this summer, I launched a startup that is looking at building a future-facing mobile platform for kids and parents. So I'm really excited about the topic, and DevEx is one of my driving principles in building teams. Leandro, you're next.
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Leandro. I'm based in Brazil. I am a senior engineering manager at ClassPass. I manage one of the squads that maintain our apps. I have been working in this IT industry over the last 25 years, more recently with mobile. So it has been a pretty interesting experience comparing the differences between stack. And I'm pretty happy to share my experience here at ClassPass with you all. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. A great sort of diversity of backgrounds here, a lot of mobile experience in depth, also some breadth, I think, in other platforms. And it'd be great to understand, use that to frame why a lot of our audience probably knows this, why mobile is unique, why it's special, and why it makes a lot of the challenges around releasing and DevEx more broadly harder. Without further ado, we'll jump into our first section here. Would love to start off by chatting with the group about the costs that come with poor DevEx and really what's behind that. This busy work term that we circle around a lot. To make it more explicit, there's a few different kinds that we talk about in the release cycle, the dev life cycle more broadly. You have manual tasks, manual work throughout the process that your team needs to deal with and wrangle. If you have automation in place, because we talk to and work with many mature teams that get far on that journey, who is building that automation, who's maintaining it and dealing with flakiness. And then the coordination effort, that kind of human busy work across this whole process. If you're especially on the larger end of the scale, you might have different product teams or groups contributing to releases. There's a lot of cross-disciplinary coordination as well across product QA and of course engineering. So the kind of babysitting coordination that goes into releases in this process. So when you have too much of this kind of busy work, you tend to have an unhappy team who's not able to focus on core work, core initiatives, and of course an impact on DevEx. But very quickly setting the stage, I'd love to hand it over to our guests for their thoughts on the grounding here. What is poor DevEx? What are some of those symptoms, let's say, of a bad release process, bad DevEx?
I'm happy to start. I think that I've had the opportunity to experience really good release processes and then a lot of dicey ones. And one of the things that I think is always really interesting is that you can really bond with other release teams over talking about DevEx and how, like, this is where you can talk shop in a like really productive way. Almost everyone is challenged in the same sorts of ways where they go to deploy and they have to wrangle a whole bunch of changes all in one package and ship them through an app store, which is a special way that we have to deploy on mobile compared to being able to continuously release independent little bits and revert what you need. So there's a lot more coordination that ends up happening on the mobile side that I think a lot of people don't realize. But it usually feels bad when you have underwater teams that are constantly firefighting. You're building out all sorts of interesting processes to manage that sort of like high stress and high interrupt situation. And there's innovation in those spaces, like building a really good incident process and building really great observability to know when something's broken. But there's also like real human cost to how it feels to be on call and whether that is feels like a reasonable thing to ask somebody to be doing or when you feel like you're like causing them trauma. But I'm curious what other folks thinks.
I think is something interesting about this is we don't talk enough about the coordination cost between these different groups, right? So like these things, like there's the on-call side of this and the coordination call of that, like trying to get a bunch of people on when something goes really wrong and you need to like call on the troops to go and fix something. There's the slow pace of that, but a lot of times people rally pretty well on a oh no situation. But like thinking about like the day-to-day work and what it looks like to go and like in an environment that maybe like a little bit less efficient environment, the amount of handoffs, the amount of time it takes to coordinate groups together, the amount of time to check on a thing to make sure a thing is right before it goes to the next person. And when something's not right, whether it's a release flow, something in CI/CD not going, whether that's even just coordinating, hey, it's time for us to release this out into the wild. Like we don't really talk enough about like how much each one of those stages takes a lot of work to get done with, and then what the handoff looks like, and then the hand back. And I think like this opportunity cost ends up being like a very brutal version of like people DevEx, where it's like, hey, as a developer, I want to be able to take the code that I get or take the code I build, ship it out, and have things just go and be safely out in the wild. But it doesn't always work that way. And so they like there's the DevEx of I have cool tools that make this stuff easy, and then there's like the benefits of DevEx that make it easier to work between teams and simplify how we hand stuff between.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
And go ahead, Gabe.
Leandro, I'm just going to ask really quickly, you and Laurie, on your current teams and past teams, do you think there was a recognition of that sort of human DevEx, as Cody put it? Do you think that leadership recognized that as a sort of separate discipline almost, or?
That's a great question. I would say yes, but over the time it becomes so natural that maybe sometimes people ignore this, say, okay, we have a defined process, let's go through without paying the proper attention on optimizations or even reviewing the existing process to make it more efficient. So I would say yes, they recognize this, but on the other hand, that's the type of thing that's pretty easy to make that's the way that it works. So we shouldn't do a lot of changes on that. And I would add like another impact on the DevEx is as engineers, we are prepared and trained to usually automatize things to reduce manual work. And if you have to do a lot of manual things, it looks like, okay, I can help others to make their job better, but I can help my job to be better, to be more efficient, and so on. So just adding a perspective on the previous comment. And I wonder about what are Laurie's thought on the recognition.
So I think this is a really interesting area where it wasn't just leadership that had a kind of different feeling about this. It's actually engineers too, and engineering teams and what they think their role in the process is. And one of the things that I've always tried to focus on is whether you're working with platform teams or you're working with release teams, a good release is one where it's actually pretty chill and you don't end up having problems. And firefighting is not the exciting part of the job where you get to show that you're there and you're doing your work and that's how you're visible. A good long stint of no incidents is actually what you're aiming for, even though that may actually be a lot harder to see. So as a leader, you need really good tools to be able to tell this story about actually the job isn't that we're in firefighting mode and heroing a lot. And it's really hard to move a culture that has become really heroing centric in order to be visible, especially in a remote first workplace. This happens even more. But that can burn out teams really fast while they still feel like that's what they have to do in order to be seen. So I think that getting everyone on the same page about what success looks like in a release is actually non-trivial. And when you're not talking about it, it's actually probably the best place you've ever been. But that's a really hard thing in this sort of day and age when we're metric driven and you have to get different metrics that actually people believe and trust.
See the negative space almost, which is hard, right? You need to see the periods where actually nothing is happening.
Prevention. It's all about, if you have introduced prevention steps, it's hard to make the case of why they were so valuable because you aren't having the problems you were before.
I'm going to ask a similar question, different framing, the mobile specific aspect. Because again, I think we assume our audience, a lot of mobile folks here, they understand, but allowing or helping the wider org to understand why mobile is different here, why sort of DevEx and solutions and pain points might be specific to mobile can be hard for other folks, stakeholders, leadership that span different platforms, harder for them to understand. Same question really for all of you actually, because Cody, obviously Sentry does a lot of stuff outside of mobile. How do you create the sense of the unique challenges of mobile and make that well understood?
I'll throw just an interesting thing. I got most of my start I didn't come into like mobile as like the place I started in development. I focused heavily on backend systems, then moved really quickly into like web. And I didn't touch mobile until like pretty far into my development career. And I think it's really interesting how like conditioned you get to a website. If something breaks, a push to just fix it. It's pretty straightforward. It's a command F5 or command R to just reload a browser and things are back. And a back end, you redeploy an API. And I'm sure there's some quirks in there that make that not always that way. But for the most part, we're treated pretty nicely in the web space. If something breaks, you push a new version, you reload the browser, and odds are high, everything's good. And more importantly, like people who show up who haven't hit your property before, things just work for. But like when I started working inside like the mobile space and started like pushing out actual applications, you find like people don't update their apps that often sometimes. Like sometimes people are way behind. People might download the broken version and rock that for a long time. And so there's a lot like the risk of things going wrong and the impact when it does go wrong is so high that like DevEx becomes so important inside of mobile because getting this stuff right and making it very easy to quickly correct when you can and more so not have it happen in the first place is so high stakes when it comes to mobile because like when things break, people just close the app and don't open it again. Like they move on. So just an interesting thing to think about for someone who didn't come from like a mobile specific background and moved into doing it a fair amount now.
Leandro, similar story, because like it's been recent you've arrived on
Yes.
ClassPass, like that transition's been and the realization, I guess, for you in terms of the differences there, DevEx wise.
Sometimes I feel like I come back to 2008 when I remember I used to work like in a big Java project and we had a release process where we had to get a lot of changes and deploy at once. But as Cody mentioned, in the mobile, it's even different because you can't just deploy a new version. You have to wait users to download, to install the new version, and so on. So this is a very different and painful process. Something that we did here at ClassPass was during the company offsite last May, we had a time where we had a room with a lot of roundtables, like where tech people were explaining tech challenges for stakeholders, for non-tech people. And one of them, it was a table that I joined with another guy here with Ray, was explaining the mobile release process to them. And it was pretty interesting because some people didn't have any idea about, for example, the Apple process, the approval process, right? So sometimes we mention to them, we can't control that part, right? We can do a wonderful job here before submitting, but after submitting, we can't control that. Sometimes we face challenges that we have no idea what's going on. And even before that, there is a process like we take a snapshot from the code bases, run some tests there, make sure that everything is working and deploy. So this was an interesting activity we did with stakeholders in general. And it looks like they could better understand the challenges on the mobile side of the projects we do here.
I have experienced this from the like mobile side the whole time, and it's still a like surprise to many people that mobile is different. And you often get the same questions at different companies over and over again. Can't you just revert that one change? And they're like, no, it went out in a bundle of 300 changes all at once. So can you revert? Can you roll back? Can you do all the things that are like absolutely standard, like continuous delivery process concepts we have our own kind of messed up versions of those things that we have implemented in various ways. And a lot of that comes back to that busy work thought of like, when I think about where all the coordination pain points are, especially with, say, feature teams versus a deployment team, if you're lucky enough to have one, it comes down to not the actual basic automation of getting stuff uploaded to the stores or having some different tracks for alphas and betas and fun stuff like that, or even the known part that is hard to manage and out of our control, which are the app store or review processes that can result in like rejections and all sorts of other fun stuff you have to learn to deal with. It's that part that we deploy as a bundle of things every time. And so at big companies, that can often mean hundreds of changes going into prod all at the same time, which may or may not have been tested even amongst each other. They've been often tested independently by independent teams, but not, oh, hey, you both introduced this the same week. So you build all sorts of other processes on top of it, like you have experiments and feature flags, and suddenly you're deploying hundreds of experiments every single week because you're trying to be continuously deliverable, but you're in mobile, so you have to ship it through an app store every time. That part can get really hard if you're trying to mimic the continuous deployment process of your backend teams, who may have really strong opinions about deployments and stability, and they have the whole SRE teams set up to think that way. And then you're like, no, we eat something into prod once or twice a month, once or twice a quarter if you're doing some like different payload type of system. Those are huge things going in all at once that you have all sorts of weird processes internally on how you coordinate with teams and how you sign off on those things and how you back out of them if you can at all.
What I love about what you said, I think there's a summary thing of CI/CD largely is, I put this in a very small box. CI/CD is pretty solved at this point in a lot of ways. We're not struggling to figure out how to build something quickly and push something out quickly. Like that very contained like functionality, that's a solve with a few exceptions. That is a solved problem. It's all of the adjacencies to this. Like when something goes wrong, how do I figure out what specific thing broke inside of it? When I am releasing something out into the wild, what does that overall flow look like? The app store processes that you talked about, like it's all of these adjacencies is where that you, not to get like campy on the title of the talk here, like this is like the true cost of mobile release. It's not hard. CI/CD part of this is not hard. Like writing the script to go and build the thing and ship the thing out, not that hard. It's all of this other stuff that like when it goes wrong, how do we respond to it? How do we find out of those 300 changes, Laurie, that you like talked about? Like, how do we find which one of those actually broke? Who owns the thing that broke there? What conditions is it breaking under? What part of a release was that in? How contained is that release, or how widespread has it gone? And this is, I think, where a lot of the, going back to where we started, like the busy work stuff comes in, is like when something breaks, figuring out all that stuff in a air quotes bad DevEx scenario is where things get really painful, because it like turns into you calling 60 of your friends and saying, do you have any idea what is actually like this weird screen is obviously broken and popping up, and I have no idea which feature this was a part of. Can we like figure this out? And really good teams have like systems and processes and tooling in place that make it very easy to pinpoint what release that happened in, how it was released, who it hit, what part was broken, and how to fix it. And there's just a big spectrum in between there. But like the CI/CD part of this just isn't hard anymore. Like that chapter is done.
The one thing I would say about that is you can learn from that side too. Like when you try and make your release process really fast in order to have a like almost as continuous as you can make it in mobile, you get these benefits of having like much smaller loads, which makes that needle in a haystack that much easier to diagnose. But you also end up with other problems with weekly release process, which is probably the fastest in mobile most of the time. It's really aggressive. And your caching strategies stop working as well as they would if you waited a little longer. And there's all sorts of other things like that. It just doesn't work the same way as a continuous deployment backend team would. Anyway, I think mobile is very special in that way. And so we have developed and innovated in interesting directions.
There's one other, before we tie up the sort of mobile is special topic, which we're all aligned on, I think at this point, another layer to it that combines all these elements, this idea of you're bundling stuff up, shipping it off, and on larger teams, it's going to contain a lot of changes, and the human aspect. And this extra layer, I think it's increasingly common, almost universal now, to have mobile resources distributed across an org. So folks are trying to take more and align them with these functional groups or like mission-driven pillars, choose your name of choice. So now you have two things happening at once. You have this big bundle getting put together every week if you're quick and getting shipped out. And that's containing these fragments of pieces from work spread across the org in these different functional groups. I think all of you have touched on it, but it's a simultaneous things of bundle this up, make sure we're on the same page about what's going out from whom and when. If stuff goes wrong, tracing that back to the original author. But then having this layer to coordinate across all these groups that are spread very often across the wider org is an extra challenge there.
Can we do the hot take portion of this? Do we like organizations where we spread out mobile resources, or do we like organizations where we centralize the mobile work together?
In spirit, I like it. This is the whole kind of, it's chicken and egg. If you have the right processes, tooling, the right humans involved, then it works. I like it in spirit, of course. Like, I think it makes sense. And it's the other reason why folks do it, to align on product and mission. I think what helps a lot, maybe this is like having your cake and eating it too, but is a solid platform team or core team to at least get at some of those underpinnings and make that consolidated, or if not that, a strong culture of mobile guilds or like chapters that come together. Make sure there is that sort of bottom fundamental layer across mobile. But so yeah, overall, I guess I prefer that structure, but you do need the support network, because if not, it's going to have its downsides and make it hard.
I have a hot take that's in a slightly different direction. I think you need all of those things. But if you don't have an internal dogfooding culture and your feature and product folks are mostly looking at prod instead of looking at internal builds, one of the challenges I've seen is that if they really want to hit a deadline for their feature in prod at scale, on mobile, you can't just flip it on. You have to plan that like releases in advance because of that slowness of people taking up the new releases, updating their apps. You're waiting for enough of them to be on the version that has your stuff that you need to actually work backwards a lot longer than having a web or a backend deploy that's like, ta-da, everyone is on that version now. You have no choice. And so that's the part that we would often have friction on, of just like, you can't just put something into the release and expect the first day of that release, everyone's got it, because that uptick takes weeks and it's a wave of things instead of there you go.
Yeah, I believe I prefer, as Gabe described it, more business string aligned squads where we have mobile and also other people, so they have autonomy. Because I would say one of the cons of having a dedicated mobile squad is managing the dependency between other squads, right? So sometimes you need something from the backend people, I don't know. So I would say like having mobile people split it into squads and have a good platform team if it's possible, or a strong guild. I would say that would be my preference based on what I know right now.
I think also parity is something that comes up a lot, of like, where is the feature? That actually complicates a lot of that coordination of like, where is that feature? Oh, it's only on iOS and web, but not on Android. And our observability is showing us it's also not working on iOS this week. Those types of things greatly complicated those types of like debugging and root causing. And so I do also like feature teams that have a little bit of everything and can make a holistic choice for that particular set of features. That generally works better. Flip side is they get very lonely when they're isolated and they're the onlys on their team. And I've seen big companies implement the same feature across multiple teams and try and deployment at the same time. And those sorts of problems are more likely to show up right as you hit the release and you have a poor release team going, oh no, 2 teams are trying to deploy a Super Bowl thing at the same time, the same place, and they both tried to turn on their experiments, and you're like, one of you gets to win.
Yeah.
So it can go either way.
I would say, but this specific thing happens whatever stack you are working, right? So at my previous company, we didn't have like mobile apps. And for a while, we had like challenges like this: 2 different squads implementing the same thing, sometimes in a different way, using different architecture patterns and so on. So yeah, I would say it's a bigger challenge. Maybe on the mobile side, it's more evident, but that's like a bigger thing for me. Go ahead, Cody.
I think I really like how Gabe described it, because I think when I ask the hot take question in my head, I tend to really like teams that are enabled to move fast. And when you have like-minded groups together who are everybody understands the deployment technologies, the deployment struggles, the build struggles, like everyone understands that, you get this additive ability to move very quickly, and you get a better velocity out of that than having to raise your hand in the stand up every day and be like, okay, on the mobile side, we have this thing this week, and everyone's like, okay, I'm on the website, so I don't care. I think you lose a lot of speed when they're embedded that way. But I do like the way Gabe phrased it around like the intentionality of these guilds of people that understand like this problem, that work very closely together. And I think you get the organizational knowledge, and you get to spread out and have this like supporting cast of people that help you make sure this stuff gets shipped out really well. But then you have these like groups that are very intentional about working together. And I think as long as you have that and you have intentionality behind how you keep these teams close, you get to capture like the benefits of the people side of like the DX here, in the sense of like how fast we can move together, how fast we can move in building and releasing software together, versus being like the lone man dropped onto a team trying to figure out how to ship on iOS when everyone's trying to debug Next.js right now.
One other sort of special group I'd like to touch on really quickly, and then I saw we have a question too we should get to on the side. Platform, core mobile teams. Maybe it's not even a team. Maybe it's that inevitably there's that one person on a team who's saddled with the platform you work, if you're not at a scale yet where you can afford a whole team. They're dealing with scripts, they're maintaining CI, they're wrangling a lot of the release work sometimes. What does DevEx, mobile DevEx look for a mobile platform engineer or team, where some of the stuff we're talking about, the busy work, is part of their job. Part of it is fixing it or addressing it, right? But it's also like they're often the people that people go to on a team when they need to get stuff fixed, deal with some release, firefighting, whatever it is. So I'm curious if folks have opinions on that sort of persona, because I know we do have some here and we talk to a bunch as well.
I'm happy to take that one first. So I've led mobile platform teams up to 12 Android, 12 iOS, sitting in a release, like war room type of a situation, with also a dedicated release team with a few people who are automating things and coordinating the weekly releases and that sort of shape, as well as you just happen to end up being the build person at your company, and like you end up specializing in that space and being the go-to. If you are the go-to, it's a really good bust factor problem for a company. It's a really stressful job. It's hard to take vacations. The human cost of being that for too long and not having it officially part of your job, and officially understanding that's often a late night hours sort of situation, that can be really hard. And a lot of companies are in that place where they don't have real dedicated teams for that. So automation, keeping it really simple, makes a lot of difference there. If you're lucky enough to work at a company that has a dedicated platform team, those tend to be really nice when they're set up as specialists in a given platform. So like having a whole bunch of Android people together, they all like share skills. They can rotate around in who is doing what and keeping track of things. We had on-call programs that supported the release process. So there were dedicated release people, but there were also, they could call in heavies if they were running into problems of any kind. So if it was a performance problem, or if it was a build problem, or if it was the actual APK is not working right, like those all things, they were available for that. And I think that can be really great when it works. But you will have friction in these sort of high stress situations of you're having to dig through and get blame to figure out which feature team has deployed which thing in order to tell them something is wrong. Nobody likes to do that job on repeat. So finding ways to make those things be like blameless postmortem-y and all of those other tools we have for regular engineering processes was essential for keeping all of those people working in the same direction. Otherwise, I'm calling you at late at night because something is broken and I don't know what. That's not a good place, whether you're a tiny team or a big team. But the last thing I would say there is, if you put too many people in between there that are not specialists in a platform, you're calling down a phone tree of a whole bunch of people who are like, but I'm the iOS person and this is an Android problem. I'm going to call the next person. And you're waking up 5 or 6 people before you get to the person you actually need to help solve the problem, which is, I think, where a lot of this busy work and frustration comes from. It's that sort of set of processes where you're trying to find the right person to help solve the problem you have this time. Anyway, Leandro, go for it.
Yeah, we don't have a dedicated mobile platform team here at ClassPass. So we have basically the string aligned squads and a mobile guild. which is a group of people, but we have also some dedicated people to work there. So I've never managed a mobile platform, but I've managed like a regular platform team. And one challenge that I see, remember, it was pretty easy to be an island when you are so disconnected from the reality, from the stream-aligned squads. So sometimes you create things, but they don't have good impact for developers. But as a platform team, you believe that's pretty cool. I remember, but that time I was planning to create a kind of a rotation program where we use it. The idea was to have a person from a string aligned team joining the platform squad for a while, maybe 2 quarters, and having a person from the platform team joining the string aligned. So in this way, you can share the expertise, but also learn like the real life, the daily problem that developers face on a daily basis. But unfortunately, I couldn't implement that. But I remember this challenge of, okay, we have a group of very specialist people, but sometimes they are so deeply engaged with that topic that they can easily disconnect from the real needs from developers.
I think this kind of makes me want to think about another part of the conversation. And we all talk about the things we want to talk about on these calls. And something we talked a lot about on the prep for this was, and we've talked about a lot on this call so far, is like we keep going back to this idea of the way teams work and the developer experience of that. I think it's good for us to now say, I think we can all acknowledge that a really good developer experience inside of your company and on the products you build is probably a competitive advantage. If your teams work really well and developers on your team are able to like ship very fast and it's very friction free, they're going to do really well. But I'd love for us to set the definition of what that is. Think about this for everybody who's wondering, is DevEx just like a phrase or is this an actual practice? Think about the workflow, and I'd love to hear from Leandro and Lori on this. What is mobile, like a good mobile DevEx to you all when you think about the workflows of the work your teams are doing every day?
I'll come back to I like it when it's chill and pretty straightforward and things just work. And I think our on-calls like that too. And that means that you have a definition of what success looks like and you can figure that out within a minute or two of looking at your observability and the state of things. And if you look at that and you see something is wrong, you have a pretty good idea runbook wise where to go. And you're not having to make a lot of new decisions for a long time until you actually get to close to the problem. There's a pretty really well understood set of things that you do first. And that keeps the stress down and you can optimize those things to not be causing busy work for certain things. If you are treating those processes like things that you optimize just like code, you will come in and eventually go, this sign-off process is doing us no good. It doesn't improve our release confidence or deployability. Why do we still do this? It's taking time and frustrating people, and you remove it. And so you don't just continuously add new things to your processes, you are innovating on the processes itself. So it's generally, if something goes wrong, people are not panicking. You're not hearing late in the week that always on Thursdays is when you find out that things have finally hit critical mass and oh no, now we're on fire. You can anticipate. And as an example, I had a running joke that right before Memorial Day, there were a few short weeks of with vacation times. And so you had short work weeks. And we knew that meant that everyone compressed their testing and they rushed to get stuff out. And then we would have a series of 3-day weekends and short work weeks through the 4th of July. We knew we could anticipate that those were always going to cause a series of hotfixes. And once you got one, you almost always were so focused on resolving that one that you were not focused on getting the next week's stuff ready. And so it would compound. So I think when you start seeing those trends, you can see what success looks like and how to avoid, you have those conversations about how do we make these less difficult for ourselves and how do we introduce something that we're not making the same mistakes over and over again.
This might be an obvious question, but what is the positive impact? What's the benefit of having fewer hotfixes, of having less firefighting? What does that allow your team to do? What does that deliver to the business?
I'll end really quickly, and then I want to know what Leandro thinks of this. First of all, if you have a business that is running based on a whole bunch of metrics, that they're core decision-making metrics, if your releases are rocky, you are blowing up all your analytics just unto themselves. And if those are your driving force behind all of your KPIs and all of your value to your shareholders and all those things, Those are volatile, which means your entire business is based on data that like is moving all around and not necessarily a good source of truth when you are having a lot of incidents and firefights. If it is stable, all of your observability starts being really easy to tell when something is wrong. But if you are really noisy and all over the place, it's really hard to make really good decisions about anything, whether your feature has successfully deployed or not. It's much more ambiguous. Vander, what do you think?
Yeah. And I think besides this, I've never met someone who really like to work as a firefighter all the time, right? Because it's stressful, right? It
Mm.
consumes your energy, even though sometimes you are not directly engaged with that topic. Something is bad is happening. We need to fix. So it brings a lot of stress to everyone. And then we have the consequence. Probably people will feel more tired. We don't feel so energetic to create something new, to have new ideas, or even to do the regular daily basis job. So yeah, I've never met someone who really likes to say, okay, I want to be in this place because of the stress.
Sorry. I was just going to say, Leandro said something really important there. If you are in firefighting mode, you never have the capacity to think ahead or
Yep.
strategize or try some, like that capacity is completely out the window. Right. Okay.
And no, that's a great point. It has two impacts, right? One is the ability to step back and take time to solve the firefighting. Like it's hard to even engage when you're firefighting. You can't engage with the fixing of the firefighting. And then the other stuff, the fun stuff I was going to say is my time as a mobile engineer. And a lot of mobile engineers I know, like you get into mobile, you fall in love with mobile because it's very close to the user and it's very sort of product forward. Setting aside the core folks and the platform folks, we love them, but a lot of mobile folks love to build product. And I think one of the things I remember from my time on a rotation managing releases was you dread that week or 2 weeks where you're on deck having to run releases. You're not allowed to work on product work. You're not allowed to do the fun stuff. And there's a toll, I think, like Leandro was saying, like over time, if you're not actualizing that way on a team, you have attrition, you have all sorts of, sort of collaboration issues that sort of stem from that kind of unhappiness. So it gets quite existential when you don't nip it in the bud.
I think, I'll be the bearer of all hot takes on this call just for fun. I've got like an interesting view on like the whole like firefighting thing. I go into all of this assuming that everything that gets shipped is going to break at some point. I just have this like baseline assumption that, especially, and I think this is going to continue to be more and more true as time goes on, especially in like the ecosystem we all live in right now with like AI both speeding up the way we build, but also getting a lot of things out there that might not be like fully tested at any given point or even halfway tested. Doesn't matter. So I go into all of these with a baseline expectation of things are going to break somewhere. There is a piece of code inside of every one of these things that I ship that is probably broken in some circumstance. And so like I go and thinking that. And so when I think about like, going back to the whole like DevX thing, for me, and this is like aside from my day job, this is even like going to what Gabe said, like guy who just likes to build some stuff and ship it out there. A good DevX to me is a set of things, whether it's processes, tools, that let me move through tasks very quickly. And I intentionally say that as a pretty simple statement, but I think of it like when things break, I don't want to have to dig through like complicated release processes to figure out where did this thing break at? I accept that it's probably going to break. And I just really hope that the DevX that I've crafted in the role that I have at any given company lets me just move through that broken thing pretty quick. I don't necessarily, I think there's extremes to this that don't line up, but I don't necessarily mind like the firefight week if I can make progress on the firefighting week. If I am just like fighting a line for a week straight of every time a problem comes, it's a 4-hour phone call because I'm coordinating between 6 different teams and we're trying to figure out how to roll back a change or change a deployment. And it went out to already hit 1 million people. So I have to figure out what to do with that and the notifications around that and all of these things. Yeah, that is a miserable experience. But if I'm getting a bunch of problems coming across my desk every time, it's cool. Okay, I can see where this broke. I can see the fix for it. I actually feel really good about that. I feel like I will fight those fires all the time because like I have clear paths to fixing it. I have good tooling that helps me figure it out. I can go and see exactly what the user's seeing on their device. And I don't have to go dig up an iPhone 8 from in a drawer somewhere and try to rerun it to see why this thing was breaking this way. Like good platforms, good teams, good DevX processes make it very easy to move through these things. And I think we get conditioned to like the not fun version of that, where it is these 4-hour stints of broken things because unoptimized environments or challenges in parts of our platforms. But when it works, it just works really well. That's like the core of DevEx to me, is like things that make developers move a lot faster, whether it's knowledge, tools, technology, or just like building really cool things, moving through tasks fast, nice, even if it's fires and broken stuff.
I like your hot take. I really like your hot take.
Subscribed.
I'm fine with the firefighting as long as it's a different fire every time. I don't care about the number of like fires in a given quarter. And every time someone has tried to make a KPI around like reduce number of hotfixes, I'm like, no, you hotfix because something was broken. You should always hotfix if there is
It's
a
a
reason.
fallacy. It doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
But I do think that one of the challenges of switching to say rotations on things in order to not burn people out, we had to reduce the size of our rotations because it felt like you forgot everything by the time you showed up again on your rotation. So it traumatized everyone every time instead of being like, oh, I remember how like the first 10 steps of this run book are always the same. That is actually really hard to do at scale. And so that is also one of the reasons why you end up relying on a core group of people that have become a specialty in which they are chill. They show up and as soon as they're there, everyone calms down. You have those people, even in the small companies, where it's like, they're the one or they're the few that they have already internalized those processes. But in the age of AI, we always know something's going to go wrong. It's just going to be ideally something different every time. And that we have the tools to get to put it all into a kind of like process that like you can handle anything that's coming and you can't necessarily guess what it's going to be. But that part isn't going to be the problem.
Exactly. I think that's really well said. So I subscribe to your TED Talk. I'm in.
I think both sides. I think what's interesting is there's been a focus on the firefighting, and that's actually to your earlier point, Lori, about I called it negative space, but like focusing on like the big sort of explosive stuff, and that's the problem. And actually looking outside that, there's something on the other side where if you're having a great release week and there's no fires and things are good, understanding that there's actually still potentially a lot of negative impact, and we're talking about competitive advantage, things to do to make life better for that person in that role. It doesn't have to be like bugs and stuff going wrong. It could be the mundane same questions getting asked from across the team, like what's shipping when. It's a classic thing from sort of product and stuff, like to that person in the hot seat, because they know, oh, I'll go to this person and they'll answer all my questions and solve my problems. It's like mundane stuff throughout releases as well. And I think adds up and leads to the same effect of this person who's in that seat. They know they're going to be distracted all the time with these mundane things. And so I'm not going to get started on that ticket or that product work because I know I'm going to be context switching in 5 minutes here. And then that over that span of time means I have just had a not particularly fun week and domino effect from there.
One thing about the quiet releases, though, especially with the small teams, is those are not always good either. There can be things going really wrong and you just don't know about them yet. You don't have enough operational excellence in place yet. And that is also terrifying. And I think a lot of the stress around incidents actually comes from when you go to do an incident and there are like no tools. And you're like, how would I figure out where to find out where that thing would be broken? And they're like, there are no events to look for and there's no dashboard to go to. But suddenly your users are like telling you really loudly somewhere that something is very wrong. And that's a terrible place to be in as a business. And so even if you think your release process is like super great and chill now and it's all automated, there are almost always ways to improve that process for your users. And there are opportunities in that space to innovate. So I think anyone who thinks that a release process is just built and is done, like they're really not thinking about the bigger picture about what you can actually do to improve your products. They're almost always like showing up randomly at a time that you didn't anticipate and like being delivered to those users in ways that you don't have any idea how that actually is working in reality unless you actually build out the flow.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something about what Cody mentioned. I love the idea of something will break at some point, right? Because that forces us, instead of ensuring that everything will work well all the time, all the potential edge cases, it forces us to think how we can easily revert this so we can have the proper time to discuss the issue and so on. And I would say that's not the regular way that we think when we create things, because we usually spend more time testing negative numbers, crazy scenarios, instead of thinking, okay, how can I do this in a way that it can easily revert when that breaks. So I love this.
Yeah, it's the understanding of what broke where. Like code is going to break. How do you fix it faster? How do you find where it's broken and fix it faster? How do you get understanding of what your users are experiencing in it? How do you understand the impact of that release overall? I think if you start it doesn't do us any good to optimize on build speed. It doesn't do us any good to continue to beat the CI/CD speed up drum. It just doesn't. It's a solved problem, and we all don't care between 15 minutes versus 30 minutes at the end of the day. I don't care about 15 minutes versus an hour in all reality. But I do care about if I can solve a problem in 5 minutes. If I can go from solving a problem in 30 minutes to down to 5 minutes, that moves the needle for me. That matters. Optimize on that side, I think.
One thing that I think actually we haven't really touched on, but release engineers feel this and feature team engineers feel this too, is on mobile, some of the decisions you have to make when something goes wrong feel pretty psychologically unsafe. If you have to halt a whole release, you're halting everybody's release. You're halting the entire train. Everybody who is packaged with you goes with you most of the time, unless you have that really great setup to be able to do things outside of the normal release process with feature flags and things like that. You can easily get into a place where, am I really going to have to tell the company that they're not shipping this week? And that has been pushed down into an individual engineer's call a lot of the time. And those types of processes can be really dicey for people unless they are really well developed and understood. Halting a release, which you can do on the Android side pretty easily, it's something that we had to build an entire infrastructure around at Reddit because people were afraid to just pull the lever, even though it's a very well understood thing in CI and in quality control processes that you should be very empowered to pull that particular lever for the good of the business. Nobody wanted to pull it. You couldn't make it easy enough. People just didn't want to be the one. And those types of things are happening a lot in our release processes too. And a lot of the coordination and busy work and stuff comes down to who do you have to ask to be able to feel good enough to just pull the lever in the first place. Funny stuff like that you just don't see outside of mobile.
Yeah. I'm going to jump in here. I want to make sure we get to some questions that folks have been asking. There's some great stuff here. Rapid fire in the interest of time. I'm going to pick on someone to answer each of these two, but of course, if others have thoughts, jump in. First one here from Vinicius was curious about, the limiting factor in speed when it comes to mobile releases. Apple's review has gone quicker, but so far, never as fast as web. Do we think that can change? Leandro, I'm going to throw that to you.
Probably not, I would say. So the question is this one. I was reading the question, sorry. However, do you believe that due to Apple's review process, this delay will never be as fast as web app, right? That's the question. I would say probably not. And there is one additional challenge, which is, okay, the review process is pretty fast, but then you can control the time that will take for people to update, so on. So I would say I don't know, I can't predict this, but I would say it will be really hard to have exactly the same speed. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely a lot of stuff would have to change in the ecosystem, and setting the app stores aside, just shipping binaries traditionally has always been slower in ways too. Cool. Next question here. I think this is served up right on a platter for you, Cody, but someone's asking what kind of observability tooling folks use apart from Firebase. Any bias here? I will have Leandro and Lauren maybe quickly answer what they've used in the past. Throw out some names, or Cody, you can jump in because you have
I'm just going to shill product in a second, y'all. You guys got to say something else first.
Let's see. Release processes, really like the actual app stores themselves. They have some pretty good stuff built in. Then Crashlytics is a go-to for everybody. We also were using a whole bunch of internal observability at certain companies where ideally you have your beta feedback and then your production feedback and a whole bunch of other stuff besides. So your own eventing. And there's some really good new observability companies out there. I'll plug one of them, which is Bitdrift, is a really good new one that we used. It's really great in our beta program at Reddit. Yeah, the more the better. Is if you have the tool and it's going to give you an answer to something, you really want to have it as early as possible.
Yeah, so here on iOS, on Android, Crashlytics, as Lori mentioned. On iOS, we use New Relic, and we just started to give a try for Datadog to see how that would work on the iOS side. So that's the tools that we use on our end.
And you have strong words with you after this guy.
So
It's always hard because you invite a company like Sentry onto a call like this, and you automatically assume that the person speaking is, of course, going to talk about Sentry. I joined Sentry because I love the workflow. I was a user before it, and I think like we tend to bias a lot towards an observability platform that is something that like you can use to go and fix problems. I think there's like looking at problems and looking at an environment and understanding what's happening in it, which is absolutely a very important problem. And then there's looking with intent to go fix. And I think we really intentionally build Sentry around this idea of like, how do you take the tracing, especially on like mobile, how do you take the tracing data that you're getting from a mobile device and use it to go and fix a problem? How do you use something like replays to go and see exactly how a user's experiencing the problem so that you can understand like the parts that are broken, what's actually experienced by the user? And so like I do love Sentry for it. I think Sentry does a really great job in mobile. Of course I'm going to say that, but I've been here since December. I joined because of the workflow of the product and I was a user for a long time. So I do a lot of cool stuff in mobile. Check out Sentry. Let me know if you have questions. You too. You too, Leandro. You too can ask questions if you'd like.
All right. All right.
You guys can stay on after. Quickly here, we have a few more minutes. An interesting question. Yeah, recommendations around having a build engineer in a team, someone dedicated to that function versus spreading that knowledge, having maybe more folks understand the build process and tooling for mobile. Lori, I'll ask you that one.
I like this question. I think that there is a point in any engineering organization where it becomes really helpful to have specialists in developer experience, platform team, and build engineers. I think it is a mistake, even at the biggest companies, to make that so specialized that there's not skill overlap with other people. That can become a huge buzz factor. And at some companies I've worked at, you're so far ahead in the innovation of those things that you are actually like paving that sort of path for people. And that is something that you really need to mentor others and bring them along. And some of our build platforms are open source. And so those things get out and can be discussed. But a lot of times you really do become a specialist that can't be easily replaced, or your build system becomes really bespoke. And that can be a problem for both the person involved who wants to go on vacation once in a while and everyone else. So I think that a good middle ground is when you have a lot of people with some build literacy. Platform teams usually grow out of a few people who are ending up doing that job a lot for a really long period of time. But you should watch the actual developer experience to decide when you really invest in having specialists in that role versus volunteers who maybe don't want to. You don't want to end up with 3-hour build times that you then have to fix. And so I think that if you are already having really poor developer experience, it's time to invest in that space earlier rather than later. They can always branch out into other roles and get you better observability or better performance and other things too. But the teams that limp along with volunteers too long, I think actually do themselves a big disjustice from not only their developer experience for their other developers and their feature teams being empowered, but their business bottom line and all of their analytics and everything else that those teams are safeguarding. So if you have policy, I think you can get it that way.
Yeah. There's something you mentioned in Leandro earlier too that I really like, and it's a sliding scale, right? Like how much the wider group having knowledge of build, just how much they know. But I think some understanding creates this empathy across the team. It removes the distance between folks that are spending more time in platform, more time in product. Like that I've found in my experience is really important. And it's a kind of internal intra DevEx, right? That makes everybody work together better when you do have that empathy for basically internal stakeholders, internal customers who are benefiting from the fruits of your labor on the build side and likewise or vice versa, shipping the actual product. Yeah, there's something really interesting there about how you structure that.
Is it okay to suggest a book for this topic? Is it
Of
fine?
course.
Yeah.
No, books.
So I really like the Team Topologist book because they explore the pros and cons for each one of these topologies, right? So it's pretty good because they don't say this is the right way of doing this, but they explore like the pros and cons. So if you are exploring this topic, I believe like Team Topologist is a good book to read.
Awesome. Maybe jot the title down in the chat there for folks /author. Awesome. Next question here, and I can answer this one really quickly actually, because we have some data to back it up unless anyone disagrees, but there's a question about how much actual time teams are spending on this sort of busy work during releases. We earlier this year ran a survey, a few hundred mobile teams of some sort of size, and found that for a given release, an engineer is spending five-ish hours on this kind of busy work, the non-value creating work. Depending on the release frequency, think about how that adds up over a year. It's actually hundreds of hours, weeks collectively wasted on this stuff. It certainly adds up. Cool. I don't know if anyone wants to help me here. There's a long question here. Yeah. Anyone with experience with a truly automated on-demand release process for mobile or native products? So I read this as like, how close have people gotten to truly continuous for mobile? And I have some anecdotes, which are a little self-serving for us and Runway, but I want to hand it over to either of you.
Only at the smallest companies that don't have a lot of coordination and multiple feature teams. As soon as you have that, I think you end up with more coordination needed, and there are manual steps still in that process. Also outside of prod. So you can actually do that way fast in your like alphas and betas and lower risk tolerance, higher risk tolerance places. Those can be auto fully without any people involved.
Yeah, so very much aligned with what Lori said. And I have seen this with smaller teams. You get to a scale where it's not going to work. But we do have some teams with Runway's help. There's my plug. Cody got one. I get one. They're running fully hands-free release trains. Some teams are on a multiple times a week schedule, and they have just the right sort of emergency valves as the inverse. These are teams that don't require too much proactive or additive sign-offs or manual work. They have gates where if some end-to-end testing or some quality stuff didn't go well, they pull the plug and it will cancel or delay a release. But if that does not come in or that doesn't happen, then things just proceed. Of course, limiting factor, still the store is still app purview, but you can get with scheduling and handling for kind of multiple releases in flight at once, you can get pretty hands-free potentially. Awesome. There's another great one. Yeah. Objective metrics, or I guess like really quantifiable stuff that you can measure to track the business impact, let's say, or the impact of the DevEx stuff we've been talking about.
I believe that you should pick a release cadence, and that's like your train is going to leave the station this many times a year. And you should try and see if grade them every single time. If we were successful in deploying what we wanted to deploy, our value was delivered to users when we said we were going to deliver it, is a good way of thinking about the high level picture. But then in the nitty gritty parts, I'm really interested in things like time to detect a problem, time to resolve a problem. Those tend to be just really highly correlated with no matter how much throughput or whether you deployed something big or small, were you able to keep your processes working in service of that kind of scheduling and that payload delivery? So change fail rates, those types of things, DORA type metrics that we've talked about for other reasons. Totally separately though, the human DevEx part, you have to measure separately, and you have to have a very good way of doing that where people will tell you the truth about what they really feel about those processes. So finding ways to engage with your guilds and get the sort of feedback that you would get that people are not willing to put in potentially a survey result. You need to have those high touch places as well as your metrics for developer happiness. And are the feature teams delivering what they want to deliver every quarter or every year? And are they seeing your process, your release process as a friction for them to deliver what they want to deliver? Or are there other things that are actually much more important for them to improve?
Yeah, I would say, just as Laurie mentioned, the DevEx metrics, probably this one is harder to have objective metrics, right? Because we are not only talking about how long a release take, how many hours and things like this, but as we discussed, the impact on the developer. And so GitHub has a pretty interesting post where they shared how they measure the impact on GitHub Copilot on GitHub engineers. And they have a very great way to measure the DevEx impact based on feelings, which is not objective, but somehow helps us to better understand the improvements, the pain points, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, you can. You really can't always measure this stuff. You do need to go qualitative with some. We're going to do one last question here related to the one we just talked about. And that's down here from Anchor. Let's say you have a sense of these metrics, the stuff you want to measure to understand how things are going in these areas. How do you get leadership to care So I guess the extension of it is, okay, you're collecting some data. You've seen, oh, there's some areas that we should be working on or improving. How do you get the buy-in? Often this stuff is less tangible than, oh, we need like better CI, or build times are terrible, but sort of that stuff. How do you start that conversation with leadership about these sort of topics?
I think you have to tell a story. I have never met an engineering leader that didn't want insights about their organizations. If you can give them insights about how their organization actually works, great. So if you can come in and say, hey, we've been watching this for a while. These types of things are happening. They're causing this kind of thing to happen. And this is happening as a result of that. And we can measure that in a way that makes sense. And now we think that our hypothesis is if we do this change, we're going to impact this, and that's good for us as a business. There you go. And if you don't have that yet, this is why case studies and white papers about other companies are so interesting, because if I can't just come in and pitch that thing straight up from my own like fledgling team who's never shown they could do that particular idea before, if I can find someone out there that has done something similar and had those results, that lends credibility to the idea that I'm also pitching of like, I've seen that they used these ways of measuring those things. And I think that we can do that pretty easily here and make that like a custom answer for us. It won't always have the same results as what happened at that other company. But what we can do is rely on like standing on their shoulders of having a good place to start investigating that sort of problem. The other way is you ask them what's important to them, and then you find a way to fit your ideas into what they need. And they can be worried about something else, but it's almost always still related. I don't want to be called into an incident on fire on a Thursday when it started on Monday to be signing off on things. You're like, okay, we need to make this often. So there are ways.
We're going to leave it there. Thank you so much to everyone who stuck around. Thank you, Cody, Laurie, and Leandro. Really enjoyed the discussion. Hope to have more. If anyone wants more questions answered, I know we didn't get to all of them. You can find us all somewhere, LinkedIn, other spots. Reach out. I'm sure everyone's happy to chat. But thank you all so much, and have a good rest of your days.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for having me.